Assembly. I would like to congratulate you and wish you all the success, Mr. President, on your election as the President of the 79th session of the UN General Assembly. I would also like to appreciate the efforts of Ambassador Dennis Francis for his skillful stewardship of the 78th session of the UNGA. Mr. President, the father of our nation, Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, declared in 1947 that we stand by the United Nations Charter and will gladly make our full contribution to peace and prosperity of the world. Pakistan has stood by this commitment unwaveringly. Today, we are facing most daunting challenges to the world order. Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, a dangerous conflict in Ukraine, destructive conflicts across Africa and Asia, rising geopolitical tensions, resurging terrorism, galloping poverty, stifling debt, and the mounting impact of climate change, we feel the chill of a new world order. In response to these challenges, our Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for the Summit of the Future. It led to the adoption of the 54 actions on development, peace and security, technology and global governance in the Pact of the Future. Mr. President, today I stand before you to express the searing pain and anguish of the people of Pakistan at the plight of the people of Gaza. Our heart bleeds as we witness the tragedy unfolding in the Holy Land, a tragedy that shakes the very conscience of humanity and the foundation of this institution. Mr. President, can we, as human beings, remain silent while children lie buried under the rubble of their shattered homes? Can we turn a blind eye to mothers cradling the lifeless bodies of the children? This is not just a conflict, this is systematic slaughter of innocent people of Palestine. Ladies and gentlemen, an assault on the very essence of human life and dignity. The blood of Gaza's children stains the hands of not just the oppressors, but also those who are complicit in prolonging this cruel conflict. When we ignore their endless suffering, we diminish our humanity. It is not enough to condemn, Mr. President. We must act now and demand an immediate end to this bloodshed. We must remember that the blood and sacrifice of the innocent Palestinians will never go waste. We must worry about their plight and difficulties and stand by them. We must work for a durable peace through the two-state nation. We must seek a viable, secure, contiguous and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its eternal capital, and to advance the goals these goals, Palestine must also be immediately admitted as a full member of the United Nations. Mr. President, in a span of a few days, Israel's unrelenting bombing of Lebanon has killed over 500 people, including women and even small children. The failure to implement UN resolutions has emboldened Israel It threatened to drag the entire Middle East into a war whose consequences could be very grave and beyond imagination. Similarly, like the people of Palestine, the people of Jammu and Kashmir too have struggled for a century for their freedom and right to self-determination. Instead of moving towards peace, India has resiled from its commitments to implement the Security Council resolutions on Jammu and Kashmir. These resolutions mandate a plebiscite to enable the people of Jammu and Kashmir to exercise their fundamental right to self-determination. Ladies and gentlemen, since the 5th of August 2019, India has initiated unilateral illegal steps to impose what its leaders ominously call a final solution for Jammu and Kashmir. Day in and day out, 900,000 Indian troops terrorize the people of occupied Jammu and Kashmir with draconian measures including prolonged curfews, extrajudicial killings, and the abduction of thousands of young Kashmiris. At the same time, in a classic settler colonial project, India is seizing Kashmiri lands and properties and settling outsiders into occupied Jammu and Kashmir in their nefarious design to transform the Muslim majority into a minority. This hackneyed tactic is employed by all occupying powers, but it has always failed. In Jammu and Kashmir too, it shall fail by the grace of God. Ladies and gentlemen, the Kashmiri people are resolute in rejection of the false Indian identity. The New Delhi seeks to impose upon them very, very severe conditions, and atrocities are being committed every hour. India's policy of brutal coercion and oppression in occupied Kashmir has ensured that Burhan Wani's legacy continues to inspire the struggle and sacrifices of millions of Kashmiris. Inspired by the legitimacy of their epic struggle, they remain defiant. Their heart-wrenching stories remind us that behind every statistic lies a human life, a dream deferred, and a hope shattered. Even more worryingly, it is engaged in massive expansion of its military capabilities, which are essentially deployed against Pakistan. Its war doctrines envisage a surprise attack and a limited war under the nuclear overhang. Thoughtlessly, India has spurned Pakistan's proposals for a mutual strategic restraint regime. Its leadership has often threatened to cross the line of control and take over Azad Kashmir. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, let me state in no uncertain terms that Pakistan will respond most decisively to any Indian aggression. Therefore, to secure durable peace, India must reverse the unilateral and illegal measures it has taken since 5th of August 2019 and enter into a dialogue for a peaceful resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in accordance with the UN security resolutions and the wishes of the Kashmiri people. Mr. President, remember, illegal occupation creates a fresh hell every day in the killing fields of Palestine and in the pristine valleys of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Apart from conflicts, Mr. President, the 21st century has brought a cascade of crises, including the reversal of development and the mounting impact of climate change. 2 years ago, my country was devastated by catastrophic floods. causing $30 billion in damages. It is now clear that each summer will bring blistering temperatures and trigger fresh climate impacts. Pakistan emits less than 1% of global carbon emissions, yet we have paid a very heavy price for no fault of ours. This is most unfair in any calculus of global justice. We must uphold the axiom, the polluter must pay. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan looks forward to fulfillment of commitments made by our development partners to support the achievements of the SDGs and climate goals, including a new annual goal beyond $100 billion in climate finance. Mr. President, with nearly 100 developing countries trapped in the vicious cycle of debt and liquidity crisis, which I always call a death trap rather than debt trap, achieving the SDGs in these circumstances remain a distant mirage. The international financial architecture, which the Secretary General has described as morally bankrupt, and the world trade and technology regimes must be reformed and aligned to promote development and global equity. Mr. President, since assuming office in March this year, the progress and prosperity of my 240 million people has been my singular focus. We have taken some very difficult but necessary decisions that have rescued our economy from collapse, restored macroeconomic stability, controlled physical deficits, and strengthened our reserves. As a result, inflation has come down to a single digit by the grace of God, and the prospects for economic growth has revived. I would like to explain this challenge and the way we are negotiating, Mr. President, by reciting a stanza from a poem which enormously makes me very emboldened, very brave, and hardworking, and commit untiring efforts. And this stanza is a befitting example of hard work and, of course, facing challenges and then pave the way for success stories. And stanza is, when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you are trudging is all uphill, when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you are trudging seems all uphill, when the credits are low and debts are high, when the credits are low and debts are high, when you want to smile but you have to sigh, when you want to smile you have to sigh, when care, read health, when care is pressing you down a bit, when care or health is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. This is how, Mr. President, we have learned to face our challenges and negotiate the most daunting challenges we have faced. Mr. President, situated at the crossroads of South and Central Asia and the Middle East, we have prioritized geoeconomics and regional connectivity to secure win-win outcomes for our people. The second phase of the landmark China-Pakistan Economic Corridor has been successfully launched through the Apex Special Investment Facilitation Council. We are mobilizing investments in resilient infrastructure, renewable energy, minerals, sustainable agriculture, and technology. This will herald a new era of development and modernization in my beloved country. Ladies and gentlemen, for 2 decades, Pakistan has fought terrorism boldly and most successfully. defeating terrorist groups within Pakistan. We have paid a very heavy price. 80,000 of our brave soldiers and civilians have been martyred, including innocent school-going children. And the gory memories of APS school carnage haunt us till date. Our economy has suffered a loss of $150 billion. Unfortunately, today we are again confronted by a new wave of externally financed and sponsored terrorism, especially by the TTP, Fitna al-Khawarij, and its associates. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, inshallah, by the grace of God, we are determined to eliminate this threat as well through our comprehensive national effort by the name of Azm-e-Istehkam, meaning resolve to promote peace and stability. And we will work collectively with the international community to combat all forms of terrorism and reform the global counter-terrorism architecture. Mr. President, Pakistan seeks the earliest possible normalization of the situation in Afghanistan. We join the UN's appeal for $3 billion in humanitarian assistance to the millions of suffering Afghan brothers and sisters. At the same time, we endorse and share the international expectations that the Afghan interim government would respect human rights, including the rights of women and girls, and promote political inclusion. In particular, the interim government must take effective action to neutralize all terrorist groups within Afghanistan, especially those responsible for cross-border terrorism against neighboring countries. These include ISIL-K, Daesh, the Al-Qaeda associated TTP, Fitna al-Khawarij, Majid Brigade, the BLA, and other terrorist groups which unfortunately are seen on Afghan territory. Mr. President, another troubling global development is the escalation of Islamophobia, which is now manifested by frequent desecrations of the Holy Quran, attacks on mosques, negative stereotyping of Muslims, and acts of discrimination and violence against them. The most alarming manifestation of Islamophobia is the Hindu supremacist agenda in India. It aggressively seeks the subjugation of 200 million Muslims and the obliteration of India's Islamic heritage. Pakistan and the OIC will work with the UN Secretary General and the Special Envoy to implement a plan of action to combat the scourge. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan seeks an immediate end to the tragic conflict in Ukraine and its peaceful resolution in accordance with the UN Charter and international agreements. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan has a long and proud history of solidarity, friendship, and cooperation with the nation of Africa. We will continue to cooperate with them to counter terrorism and resolve regional conflicts, including through UN peacekeeping and peace building in the region. Finally, Mr. President, as we leave this august hall, we must carry with us a message for our people, that the weak are not voiceless, that the oppressed should not lose hope, that poverty is not preordained, and that Allah Almighty promise of justice and equality in our terrestrial home must be respected. I thank you all and thank you very much for your time. God bless you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of the State of Israel. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly. Order, please. Ladies and gentlemen, order. Order, please.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. But after I heard the lies and slanders leveled at my country by many of the speakers at this podium, I decided to come here and set the record straight. I decided to come here to speak for my people, to speak for my country, to speak for the truth. And here's the truth. Israel seeks peace. Israel yearns for peace. Israel has made peace and will make peace again. Yet we face savage enemies who seek our annihilation, and we must defend ourselves against these savage murderers. Our enemies seek not only to destroy us, they seek to destroy our common civilization and return all of us to a dark age of tyranny and terror. When I spoke here last year, I said we faced the same timeless choice that Moses put before the people of Israel thousands of years ago. As we were about to enter the Promised Land, Moses told us that our actions will determine whether we bequeath to future generations a blessing or a curse. And that is the choice we face today. The curse of Iran's unremitting aggression, or the blessing of a historic reconciliation between Arab and Jew. In the days that followed that speech, the blessing I spoke of came into sharper focus. A normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel seemed closer than ever. But then came the curse of October 7th. Thousands of Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists from Gaza burst into Israel in pickup trucks, on motorcycles, and they committed unimaginable atrocities. They savagely murdered 1,200 people. They raped and mutilated women. They beheaded men. They burned babies alive. They burnt entire families alive, babies, children, parents, grandparents, in scenes reminiscent of the Nazi Holocaust. Hamas kidnapped 251 people from dozens of different countries, dragging them into the dungeons of Gaza. Israel has brought home 154 of these hostages, including 117 who returned alive. I want to assure you, we will not rest until the remaining hostages are brought home too. And some of their family members are here with us today. I ask you to stand up. With us is Eli Stevie, whose son Idan was abducted from the Nova Music Festival. That was his crime. A music festival. And these murderous monsters took him. Kobe Smirno, whose son Jonathan was murdered, and his corpse was taken into the dungeons, into the terror tunnels of Gaza. A corpse held hostage. Salim al-Atrash, whose brother Muhammad, a brave Arab Israeli soldier, was murdered. His body too was taken to Gaza. And so was the body of Ifat Hyman's daughter in Bar, who was brutally murdered at that same music festival. With us is Sharon Sharabi, whose brother Yossi was murdered, and who prays for his older brother Eli, who is still held hostage in Gaza. And with us too is Izhar Lifsich from Kibbutz Nir Oz, a kibbutz that was wiped out by the terrorists. Thankfully, we achieved the release of his mother Yocheved, but his father Oded is still languishing in an underground terrorist hell of Hamas. I again promise you, we will return your loved ones home. We will not spare that effort until this holy mission is accomplished. Ladies and gentlemen, the curse of October 7th began when Hamas invaded Israel from Gaza. But it didn't end there. Israel was soon forced to defend itself on 6 more war fronts organized by Iran. On October 8th, Hezbollah attacked us from Lebanon. Since then, they fired over 8,000 rockets at our towns and cities, at our civilians, at our children. 2 weeks later, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen launched drones and missiles at Israel, the first of 250 such attacks, including one yesterday aimed at Tel Aviv. Iran's Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq have targeted Israel dozens of times over the past year as well. Fueled by Iran, Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria perpetrated scores of attacks there and throughout Israel. And last April, for the first time ever, Iran directly attacked Israel from its own territory, firing 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at us. I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning. Ladies and gentlemen, as Israel defends itself against Iran in the 7-front war, the line separating the blessing and the curse could not be more clear. This is the map I presented here last year. It's a map of a blessing. It shows Israel and its Arab partners forming a land bridge connecting Asia and Europe between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Across this bridge, we will lay rail lines, energy pipelines, fiber optic cables, and this will serve the betterment of 2 billion people. Now look at this second map. It's a map. Look at the second map. It's a map of a curse. It's a map of an arc of terror that Iran has created and imposed from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Iran's malignant arc has shut down international waterways. It cuts off trade. It destroys millions, destroys nations from within, and inflicts misery on millions. On the one hand, a bright blessing a future of hope. On the other hand, a dark future of despair. And if you think this dark map is only a curse for Israel, if you think that, then you should think again. Because Iran's aggression, if it's not checked, will endanger every single country in the Middle East and many, many countries in the rest of the world. Because Iran seeks to impose its radicalism well beyond the Middle East. That's why it funds terror networks on 5 continents. That's why it builds ballistic missiles for nuclear warheads to threaten the entire world. For too long, the world has appeased Iran. It turns a blind eye to its internal repression. It turns a blind eye to its external aggression. Well, that appeasement must end. And that appeasement must end now. Nations of the world should support the brave people of Iran who want to rid themselves of this evil regime. Responsible governments should not only support Israel in rolling back Iran's aggression, they should join Israel. They should join Israel in stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. In this body, in the Security Council, we're going to have a deliberation in a few months. And I call on the Security Council to snap back UN Security Council sanctions against Iran, because we must all do everything in our power to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. For decades, I've been warning the world against Iran's nuclear program. Our actions delayed this program by perhaps a decade, but we haven't stopped it. We've delayed it, but we haven't stopped it. Iran now seeks to weaponize its nuclear program for the sake of the peace and security of all your countries. For the sake of the peace and security of the entire world, we must not let that happen. And I assure you, Israel will do everything in its power to make sure it doesn't happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question before us is simple. Which of these 2 maps that I showed you will shape our future? Will it be the blessings of peace and prosperity for Israel, our Arab partners, and the rest of the world? Or will it be the curse in which Iran and its proxies spread carnage and chaos everywhere? Israel has already made its choice. We've decided to advance the blessing. We're building a partnership for peace with our Arab neighbors while fighting the forces of terror that threaten that peace. For nearly a year, the brave men and women of the IDF have been systematically crushing Hamas's terror army that once ruled Gaza. On October 7th, the day of that invasion into Israel, that terror army numbered nearly 40,000 terrorists. It was armed with more than 15,000 rockets. It had 350 miles of terror tunnels, an underground network bigger than the New York subway system, which they used to wreak havoc above and below ground. A year later, the IDF has killed or captured more than half of these terrorists, destroyed over 90% of their rocket arsenal, and eliminated the key segments of their terror tunnel network. In major military operations, we destroyed nearly all of Hamas's terror battalions, 23 out of 24 battalions. Now, to complete our victory, we are focused on mopping up Hamas's remaining fighting capabilities. We are taking out senior terrorist commanders and destroying remaining terrorist infrastructure. But all the while, and I'll say this one more time, we remain focused on our sacred mission, bringing our hostages home, and we will not stop until that mission is complete. Now, ladies and gentlemen, even with Hamas's greatly diminished military capability, The terrorists still exercise some governing power in Gaza by stealing the food that we enable aid agencies to bring into Gaza. Hamas steals the food, and then they hike the prices. They feed their bellies, and then they fill their coffers with money that they extort from their own people. They sell the stolen food at exorbitant prices. And that's how they stay in power. Well, this too has to end, and we're working to bring it to an end. And the reason is simple. Because if Hamas stays in power, it will regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again and again and again, as it is vowed to do. So Hamas has got to go. Just imagine, for those who say, well, Hamas has to stay, it has to be part of a post-war Gaza, imagine in a post-war situation in World War II, imagine allowing the defeated Nazis in 1945 to rebuild Germany. It's inconceivable. It's ridiculous. It didn't happen then. It's not going to happen now. This is why Israel will reject any rule for Hamas in a post-war Gaza. We don't seek to resettle Gaza. What we seek is a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Only then can we ensure that this round of fighting will be the last round of fighting. We are ready to work with regional and other partners to support a local civilian administration in Gaza committed to peaceful coexistence. As for the hostages, I have a message for the Hamas captors. Let them go. Let them go. All of them. Those alive today must be returned alive, and the remains of those whom you brutally killed must be returned to their families. Those families here with us today, and others in Israel, deserve to have a resting place for their loved ones, a place where they can grieve and remember them. This war, ladies and gentlemen, this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it. Israel must also defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is the quintessential terror organization in the world today. It has tentacles that span in all continents. It has murdered more Americans and more Frenchmen than any group except bin Laden. It's murdered the citizens of many countries represented in this room. And it has attacked Israel viciously over the last 20 years, in the last year, completely unprovoked. A day after the Hamas massacre, on October 7th, Hezbollah began attacks against Israel, which forced more than 60,000 Israelis on our northern border to leave their homes, becoming refugees in their own land. Hezbollah turned vibrant towns in the north of Israel into ghost towns. So I want you to think about this in equivalent American terms. Just imagine if terrorists turned El Paso and San Diego into ghost towns. Then ask yourself, how long would the American government tolerate that? A day? A week? A month? I doubt they tolerate it even for a single day. Yet Israel has been tolerating this intolerable situation for nearly a year. Well, I've come here today to say, enough is enough. We won't rest until our citizens can return safely to their homes. We will not accept a terror army perched on our northern border, able to perpetrate another October 7th-style massacre. For 18 years, Hezbollah brazenly refused to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which requires it to move its forces away from our borders. Instead, Hezbollah moved right up to our border. They secretly dug terror tunnels to infiltrate our communities and indiscriminately fired thousands of rockets into our towns and villages. They fire these rockets and missiles not from military sites, not from that. They do that too. But they fire those rockets and missiles after they place them in schools, in hospitals, in apartment buildings, and in the private homes of the citizens of Lebanon. They endanger their own people. They put a missile in every kitchen, a rocket in every garage. I said to the people of Lebanon this week, get out of the death trap that Hezbollah has put you in. Don't let Nasrallah drag Lebanon into the abyss. We're not at war with you. We're at war with Hezbollah, which has hijacked your country and threatens to destroy ours. As long as Hezbollah chooses the path of war, Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right to remove this threat and return our citizens to their homes safely. And that's exactly what we're doing. Just this week, the IDF destroyed large percentages of Hezbollah's rockets, which had built with Iran's funding for 3 decades. We took out senior military commanders who not only shed Israeli blood, but American and French blood as well. And then we took out their replacements, and then the replacements of their replacements. And we'll continue degrading Hezbollah until all our objectives are met. Ladies and gentlemen, we're committed to removing the curse of terrorism that threatens all civilized societies. But to truly realize the blessing of a new Middle East, we must continue the path we paved with the Abraham Accords 4 years ago. Above all, this means achieving a historic peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And having seen the blessings that we've already brought with the Abraham Accords, the millions of Israelis who've already flown back and forth across the Arabian Peninsula, over the skies of Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf countries, the trade, the tourism, the joint ventures, the peace, I say to you, what blessings such a peace with Saudi Arabia would bring. It would be a boon to the security and economy of our two countries. It would boost trade and tourism across the region. It would help transform the Middle East into a global juggernaut. Our two countries could cooperate on energy, water, agriculture, artificial intelligence, and many, many other fields. Such a peace, I'm sure, would be a true pivot of history. It would usher in a historic reconciliation between the Arab world and Israel, between Islam and Judaism, between Mecca and Jerusalem. While Israel is committed to achieving such a peace, Iran and its terror proxies are committed to scuttling it. That's why one of the best ways to foil Iran's nefarious designs is to achieve the peace. Such a peace would be the foundation for an even broader Abrahamic alliance. And that alliance would include the United States, Israel's current Arab peace partners, Saudi Arabia, and others who choose the blessing of peace. It would advance security and prosperity across the Middle East and bring enormous benefits to the rest of the world. With American support and leadership, I believe this vision can materialize, and much sooner than people think. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I will do everything in my power to make it happen. This is an opportunity that we and the world should not let go by. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel has made its choice. We seek to move forward to a bright age of prosperity and peace. Iran and its proxies have also made their choice. They want to move back to a dark age of terror and war. And now I have a question. And I pose that question to you. What choice will you make? Will your nation stand with Israel? Will you stand with democracy and peace? Or will you stand with Iran, a brutal dictatorship that subjugates its own people, exports terrorism across the globe? In this battle between good and evil, there must be no equivocation. When you stand with Israel, you stand for your own values and your own interests. Yes, we're defending ourselves, but we're also defending you against a common enemy that through violence and terror seeks to destroy our way of life. So there should be no confusion about this. But unfortunately, there is a lot of it in many countries and in this very hall, as I've just heard. Good is portrayed as evil, and evil is portrayed as good. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of genocide, when we defend ourselves against enemies who try to commit genocide against us. We see this too when Israel is absurdly accused by the ICC prosecutor of deliberately starving Palestinians in Gaza. What an absurdity! We helped bring in 700,000 tons of food into Gaza. That's more than 3,000 calories a day for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of deliberately targeting civilians. We don't want to see a single person, a single innocent person die. That's always a tragedy. And that's why we do so much to minimize civilian casualties, even as our enemies use civilians as human shields. And no army has done what Israel is doing to minimize civilian casualties. We drop flyers, we send text messages, we make phone calls by the millions to ensure that Palestinian civilians get out of harm's way. We spare no effort in this noble pursuit. We see yet another profound moral confusion when self-described progressives march against the democracy of Israel. Don't they realize they support the Iranian-backed goons in Tehran and in Gaza, the goons who gun down protesters, murder women for not covering their hair, and hang gays in public squares, some progressives? According to the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Iran funds and fuels many of the protesters against Israel. Who knows, maybe some of the protesters, or even many of the protesters outside this building now. Ladies and gentlemen, King Solomon, who reigned in our eternal capital, Jerusalem, 3,000 years ago, proclaimed something that is familiar to all of you. He said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Well, in an age of space travel, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence, some would argue that's a debatable statement. But one thing is undeniable. There is definitely nothing new at the United Nations. Take it from me. I first spoke from this podium as Israel's ambassador to the UN in 1984. That's exactly 40 years ago. And in my maiden speech here, I think it's the same podium, by the way. In my maiden speech here, I spoke against a proposal to expel Israel from this body. 4 decades later, I find myself defending Israel against that same preposterous proposal. And who's leading the charge this time? Not Hamas, but Abbas, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. This is the man who claims he wants peace with Israel. Yet he still refuses to condemn the horrific massacre of October 7th. He's still paying hundreds of millions to terrorists who murder Israelis and Americans. It's called pay for slay. The more you murder, the more you get paid. And he still wages unremitting diplomatic warfare against Israel's right to exist and against Israel's right to defend itself. And by the way, they amount to the same thing. Because if you can't defend yourself, you can't exist. Not in our neighborhood, certainly, and maybe not in yours. Standing in this podium 40 years ago, I told the sponsors of that outrageous resolution to expel Israel, gentlemen, check your fanaticism at the door. Today, I tell President Abbas and all of you who would shamefully support that resolution, check your fanaticism at the door. The singling out of the one and only Jewish state continues to be a moral stain on the United Nations. It has made this once respected institution contemptible in the eyes of decent people everywhere. But for the Palestinians, this UN House of Darkness is home court. They know that in this swamp of anti-Semitic bile, there's an automatic majority willing to demonize the Jewish state on anything. In this anti-Israel flat earth society, any false charge, any outlandish allegation can muster a majority. In the last decade, there have been more resolutions passed against Israel in this hall at the UN General Assembly than against the entire world combined. Actually, more than twice as many. Since 2014, this body condemned Israel 174 times. It condemned all the other countries in the world 73 times. That's more than 100 extra condemnations for the Jewish state. What hypocrisy, what a double standard, what a joke. So the UN's hostility So all the speeches you heard today, all the hostility directed at Israel this year, it's not about Gaza. It's about Israel. It's always been about Israel's very existence. And I say to you, until the Jewish state is treated like other nations, until this anti-Semitic swamp is drained, the UN will be viewed by fair-minded people everywhere as nothing more than a contemptuous farce. Now, given the anti-Semitism at the UN, it should surprise no one that the prosecutor at the ICC, one of the UN's affiliated organs, is considering issuing arrest warrants against me and Israel's defense minister, the democratically elected leaders of the democratic state of Israel. The ICC prosecutors rushed to judgment. His refusal to treat Israel with its independent courts the way other democracies are treated is hard to explain by anything other than pure anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, the real war criminals are not in Israel. They're in Iran. They're in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. Those of you who stand with these war criminals, those of you who stand with evil against good, with a curse against the blessing, those of you who do so should be ashamed of yourselves. But I have a message for you. Israel will win this battle. We'll win this battle because we don't have a choice. After generations in which our people were slaughtered, remorselessly butchered, and no one raised a finger in our defense, we now have a state. We now have a brave army, an army of incomparable courage, and we are defending ourselves. As the book of Samuel says in the Bible, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The eternity of Israel will not falter. In the Jewish people's epic journey from antiquity, in our odyssey through the tempests and upheavals of modern times, that ancient promise has always been kept, and it will hold true for all time. To borrow a great poet's phrase, Israel will not go gently into that good night. We will never need to rage against the dying of the light, because the torch of Israel will forever shine bright. To the people of Israel and to the soldiers of Israel, I say, be strong and of good courage. חזקו ואמצו ואל תיראו מפניהם, כי אדוני אלוהיך הוא ההולך עמך, לא ירפך ולא יעזבך. Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live, now, tomorrow, forever. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Mia Amor Motley, Minister, Minister for National Security and the Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
President, we need a reset, and we need to reset. Mr. President, in your absence, I congratulate you on your assumption of this chairmanship of the General Assembly. We can wait. As I said, Mr. President, we need a reset, and we need to reset. Those of us here today representing our brothers and our sisters the world over have endured 4 years of polycrises. As the children of Mother Earth, we continue to wrestle with the climate crisis. As a human family, we grapple with the legacy of the pandemic. As a digitally connected people, we are now, regrettably, confronted by multiple theaters of war and scenes of horror and famine flowing from that war. Armed conflict instead of pursued development. Citizens of every country as well, struggling to contain the rising cost of living and the implications for them and their families on a day-to-day basis. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, we are all now threatened by the second but silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, together with a growing incidence of death and disability from chronic non-communicable diseases. We cannot afford the distraction of war. If ever there was a time to pause and to reset, it is now. Collectively as an international community, and individually as leaders in each of our countries, we must now deliver new opportunities and solutions to these crises which dampen economic growth, which restrict the ambitions of our people and numb our sense of the beauty and goodness that the world ought to be offering because it has it to offer. The reset for which I am calling, and indeed all of our citizens are demanding, must see an end to all forms of discrimination. That rules and institutions today exist which create first and second class citizens, as we have said from this podium year after year, depending on your nation of origin, militate against the trust and the credibility and the hope, and it fosters a crisis of confidence in the existing international order, which must become inclusive and responsive for all. More than any other complaint from this podium has been the disparity in treatment and the inability to be able to have fair and transparent treatment for all that would lead to the trust necessary for us to solve the problems of our times that are truly beyond man-made causes. Neo-colonialist structures that perpetuate and reflect an old world order characterized by racism and classism and misogyny, while ignoring the legitimate aspirations of billions, will not help to foster the hope or trust that is necessary to meet these polycrises. We must ensure that the global institutions give developing countries, especially small vulnerable states like my own, or vulnerable middle-income countries, seats at the table of decision-making where we can be seen, heard, become active agents in our own cause and lead our own development paradigms. My friends, we are reminded that 2024 is the final year of the United Nations Decade for the People of African Descent. Much has been achieved, but the recognition, the justice, and the development for people of African descent that was promised by this decade has, to say the least, not yet been fully realized. And it is for this reason that the Caribbean community joins the growing chorus, and my own country in particular, for the immediate proclamation of a second decade, to complete the unfinished work and address the matter of reparations for slavery and colonialism. I start here because this is a necessary but complex conversation. And the Caribbean community is resolute that it must happen. Its resolution lies, and I want to be very clear, its resolution lies in a multi-generational approach, in the same way that the £20 million sterling debt that was incurred by the British government only was repaid in this 21st century, almost 200 years later. So that the notion of unaffordability becomes a non-issue once we recognize that the solution to reparations must be multi-generational and grounded in development. Mr. President, of necessity, the reset must also be characterized by institutional reform, which has to start in the United Nations councils. These councils suggest that some are full members, and others are only part members, and some may be part-time members, and some may be occasional members. All of this has no place in the 21st century. And the anger and the mistrust of our citizens and institutions, in leaders, in multilateralism, and in the processes which exclude while yielding much talk and little action is very real. And nowhere is reform and consequentially trust and hope more important to the well-being of billions of people today than in relation to the global financial architecture. Restricted access to capital, its disproportionately high costs, barring us from doing that which we must, its inadequate scale, and the overwhelming burden of debt often imposed on us by circumstances beyond our control. These are all now combining to force governments in the world's poorest countries, and frankly, across many vulnerable middle-income countries, to devote more resources to debt service than to health and education, and in some instances, even infrastructure. For far too many members of the human family, cold ground is our bed, and rock is our pillow. Too many go to bed with their bellies hungry, and too many may not even have a bed. Our reset must therefore collectively build a common agenda that reflects and reinforces our shared humanity. It is that shared humanity that binds us together. Mr. President, you know better than most. Our African brothers and sisters got it right with the principle of Ubuntu. And I've used this principle, this General Assembly, to remind us that its simplicity is what we should aspire to. I am because you are. I am because we are. My well-being is tied to yours, and our collective well-being is connected to Mother Earth. This best voices the approach needed to give expression to the reset that is absolutely necessary. And we acknowledge that there are glimpses of hope. We have, for example, on Monday, agreed to a pact for the future, but we still have war. We have agreed on a global digital compact, but we still have raging pandemics in the slow motion silent pandemic. All of this rests, my friends, on the common agenda that the Secretary General had set out for us before. Yesterday, we agreed in a high-level meeting on a political declaration on antimicrobial resistance. A lot of fancy words, but this is where the rubber hits the road. Because all of us in this room know people who have died from infections and for whom the antibiotics simply are no longer effective. So that within 48 hours, a person's life is snuffed out, almost as if they were at war. My friends, following on the intervention of the Bridgetown Initiative and the Paris Pact for People and Planet, the efforts of many across the board, we acknowledge that there is some hope. And it is evident in the beginnings of the reform that we are seeing little by little, but nevertheless, they have started. These are all important steps, but we cannot take our eyes off the prize. Barbados' call for fundamental reset includes attitudes and behavior as much as actions or reforms. Heads of government are in agreement that we must trigger national development agendas of transformation with both speed and scale. We have a date with destiny against 1.5 degrees. We know that that is what is needed to survive. And the implications for people, even as we speak, can be dire. But if there is a failure to act with clarity of purpose, and if the political will retards progress on the front of the much-needed reform within the international financial institutions, purely because heads of government do not speak to ministers of finance when they reach Washington, D.C., or their board directors, if there is a need for that to be dealt with, then, my friends, there must be a commitment to be equal to the current challenges of member states if we are not to perpetuate the discriminatory practices that result in undermining the transformational opportunities that we need. Depriving vulnerable countries from being able to access concessional income that is long enough to build the resilience to save lives and to protect livelihoods is unjust. And that is why we must remain focused. That is why, my friends, we launched yesterday the third iteration of the Bridgetown Initiative, which identifies three key principles, very simply. One, we must change the rules of the international financial system and reform its governance and instruments. Two, we must shock-proof vulnerable economies by dealing with debt and liquidity in a comprehensive development-focused manner. And if we need to give countries a shot of liquidity like we give them a shot of adrenaline to avoid them falling off the cliff of death, then we must do so. And thirdly, we must augment financing by boosting country capacity to invest in resilience by several means, including what has been announced already, the rechanneling of special drawing rights through our multilateral development partners, but that will only be truly effective if there is another issuance of SDRs in the near future. Indeed, we must also address the challenge, and this I believe to be the fundamental mission of this generation, of how we are going to secure the global public commons to be able to maintain our safety and stability as a global community. We're going to have to discuss how we can secure it and, of course, how we must finance it. And that is not only the climate crisis or the loss of biodiversity that we speak about, but the other many global challenges that can truly destabilize countries and regions. Mr. President, these considerations are of fundamental importance to the sustainable existence of our generations, future generations. The SIDS agenda is another story of promises made but not kept. 30 years ago, the international community gathered in my own country to take action for the first time on the unique challenges faced by small island developing states. We birthed in my home country the first ever global agenda for small island developing states, which became known as the Barbados Program of Action. I thank Mauritius for its strategy of implementation, Samoa for its pathway. They were carriers of the baton of a development agenda for small island developing states in the intervening years, in the face of multiple global crises from health to climate to finance. The vulnerabilities, yes, of our countries as small states have become more pronounced. In May of this year, we gathered in Antigua and Barbuda for the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States. And I call on the international community and the multilateral system to let us work together to ensure that the promise created in Bridgetown in 1994 is delivered and realized through the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS 2024, otherwise known as ABBAS. Let me use this opportunity as well to inform you that 2 days ago we took over the presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, the V20 countries of the world, from Ghana, whose president I would like to thank for the excellent stewardship of the group over the past 2 years, and indeed for the strengthening of its institutional capacity. The priorities of our term as chair of the V20 countries will be the multiple dimensions of climate crisis, dealing with them, the impact of the climate crisis on human health, and of course the issue of debt and climate, because if we don't solve that, we cannot take the appropriate actions to deal with climate. I invite all United Nations members who are not yet members of the V20 but who are climate vulnerable to join this group, because it is only through amplification of our voices and consistency of our message and solidarity that we will continue to see the pace and scale of reforms that we need to be able to save our people's lives. I commend to you the declaration of the leaders of the Climate Vulnerable Forum that was adopted this week on Wednesday. Mr. President, above all else, we need a global reset on peace. There needs to be global peace. And those of us who are old enough would have recognized that there are peaks and valleys as it relates to this issue of conflict. There are few areas where the world is more in need of the United Nations acting as the United Nations to secure the objectives of the Charter than in the area of peace and security. The silence that has engulfed Sudan is unacceptable and may well be rooted in the racism that the world still carries as a badge of honor from the victories of the last great war of the World War II. The actions in Myanmar cannot continue. Ukraine has sucked more oxygen out of the global community and the global financial system than any of us can appropriately accept at the very time when the world needs to be applying its resources and efforts to fighting the greatest crisis known to mankind. And the spread of the war from Gaza to the consequences in the West Bank to now clearly what is happening in Lebanon as we speak with Israel, all of these are but the tip of an iceberg of death, violence, and instability, and robs the global community of oxygen and resources at the very time when we need it most in a strategic way. We all know, as students of history, that even the longest war in history came to an end. These wars, yes, they too will come to an end. But the question is when and at what cost, and without much loss of life, with how many children not being able to be either given the chance to live or will now live with memories of war that will affect their every action for the next 60, 70, 80 years of their lives. Innocent people are paying the price with the one thing that is theirs to give, and they don't give it willingly. It is their life. Unless we address the root causes of these wars, one by one, and the manners in which they are being sustained and financed, we will never know anything else other than war and rumors of war in these theaters. The transmittal of these scenes of horror in real time into people's bedrooms, into people's living rooms, will trigger two extreme reactions, neither of which are acceptable to us in the third decade of the 21st century. We will either get the desensitizing of ordinary people to the loss of lives, especially those of innocent children and women on the one hand, or we will get on the other hand the anger and inclination for vengeance that it spawns necessarily. We need peace. And it cannot be too difficult for us to work for peace. It is the same Bible that tells us in the stories of the Old Testament, much which has guided many people across this world. But when we turn from the Old Testament to the New Testament, it is Romans that says to us, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, not any country, not any human being. So that the Bible can't be used as a convenient aid when it suits us and rejected when it doesn't. In the midst of this maelstrom, we were very clear. My country took the step this year of recognizing and establishing diplomatic relations with the state of Palestine, in spite of having supported a two-state solution since 1969. And we did this because it is clear to us that the state and people of Palestine, human beings, are entitled to full recognition by integration into and support from the international community. The Charter does not say we the people, with the exception of any one group from any one part of the world. We join with others, therefore, in congratulating the state of Palestine in taking their seat among the United Nations member states as they did on the 10th of September of this year. And let me be clear, we condemn the actions of Hamas on October 7th. But we equally and strongly deplore the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which is the result of the disproportionate use of force by Israel. There's no justification for it. And that is why treaties exist governing the rules of engagement for war. Because we as human beings learnt better and know better and committed to better. A two-state solution, no matter how elusive it may appear to be now, is the only answer. And I've said already this week that we have known difficult battles in mankind's history. But when we were in it, we didn't think we could achieve it. But we did. We abolished slavery. We removed apartheid in South Africa. These battles are not beyond our creativity, our capacity, and our resilience to resolve them. Similarly, we insist that the killing in Ukraine really has to stop. The people of Ukraine must be allowed to live within the internationally recognized boundaries of their state in peace and freedom from the threat of use or force. And as I said, it is sucking too much oxygen out of the global financial system, and countries that should be the beneficiary of aid are being told that they may have to wait in the interest of the defense of others because of war. I say to us truly, there has to be a singular commitment to build a peace. Truly. Mr. President, my own region has not escaped the scourge of instability and violence. The Americas do not constitute today a theater of war, but we are today witnessing, for some years now, an unprecedented escalation in the number and caliber of assault weapons which are finding themselves in the hands of criminals who are wreaking havoc on the legal systems and our societies, particularly in the small island developing states of the Caribbean and indeed in the wider states of Central and Latin America. This scourge caused by guns manufactured in the United States of America primarily also requires a fundamental reset. The right of persons to bear arms in countries not engaged in military conflict should not be an opening to accept as legitimate the presence of assault weapons in countries. It is simply not right. There is no place for assault weapons in our societies. I turn now to the fate of the people of Haiti, which continues to be of major concern to our people in the Caribbean region. The global community now has an opportunity for an essential reset with how it addresses its relationship with Haiti, and which has been born in all kinds of semi and partial concern over the course of the last few decades. We continue to have it as a recurring decimal because we have failed to solve the problems and put them on a sustainable path to development for its people. What is needed is transformation of our sister nation. And yes, we must provide first and foremost security, but transformation must be its handmaiden. The government and people of Haiti need the full support of the international community, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And yes, this starts by extending the mandate of the Multinational Security Support Force, escalating the work of the United Nations, deploying all the tools of bilateral, regional, and global cooperation, not excluding countries who want to participate for spurious reasons, ensuring that those of us who can step up to the plate by significantly increasing the pledge funds that we do so, because we know that it takes cash to be able to deploy the forces and the police necessary to help with the restoration, so that Haitian mother or that Haitian child can go about their day-to-day life without fear of being assaulted or killed or being denied the right to work because of their simple fear of walking the streets. The Caribbean community has been working hard this year to support our largest member state. And in the early part of the first few months of this year, we met on Haiti almost 3 to 4 times a week to guarantee the stability that we ask you now to help us secure. We thank the efforts of the Eminent Persons Group of former CARICOM Prime Ministers who were on the front line of helping to resolve this complex problem day in and day out, so that we could find a political consensus for Haiti. That Haiti had at this General Assembly both the interim president of the Transitional Council and Prime Minister Cornille is a remarkable achievement given where Haiti was in February of this year. Let them continue on a path, please, of securing their future. And we cannot be on this podium speaking about Haiti without thanking Kenya and President Ruto for their remarkable leadership. After many delays and in what represents now a historical precedent for an African country, they have ensured that an African country has taken the lead in helping to tackle the peace and security challenge beyond its own continent. That is the kind of reset that we need in the international community. And Mr. President, You cannot come on this platform, regrettably, although I look forward to the day when I will not have to say it, when we must ask for reprieve for the people of Cuba. It is unacceptable, it is unconscionable, and that it continues today is a mark on our international conscience. The Cuban people continue to face the most dire of economic circumstances, and that this is directly as a result of its exclusion and its designation as a state sponsor of terrorism. And I have addressed our only knowledge of terrorism, and Cuba is in fact the downing of the Cubana plane off the waters of Barbados, where Cubans, Guyanese, and Koreans were killed. My friends, Cuba has been a valuable partner, stepping up for us when it has mattered most, by the provision of nurses and doctors in pandemics, and by the provision of other essential workers when the global community needed it, and when people needed to be liberated in southern Africa. The reality is that we must have and continue to have resolve in calling for the embargo to be lifted, and we will condemn it year after year after year because it is simply wrong. As we say so, we pray that the people of Cuba, as they determine what damages they have found from Hurricane Helen, as well as we pray for the people of Florida, who clearly are going to spend the next few days identifying the damage as a result of a hurricane that hit Category 4 when it reached Florida. This is the climate crisis that we speak about. The people of Nigeria are still counting the bodies with respect to the floods that took place there. We have hard work to do. In our own Caribbean region, Beryl literally decimated the islands of Carriacou and Union Island, and indeed would have affected Grenada and St. Vincent more broadly. Jamaica and my own country's coastal infrastructure was significantly affected, with our fishing industry, 90% of it being decimated. This season of superlatives, with its floods and droughts, its hurricanes and fires, will take the lives and livelihoods of too many. The climate crisis is hitting us almost weekly across the globe. The deniers of the climate crisis, they too need a reset that will admit of the absolute necessity of collective action by the global community to save our way of life and our planet. Mr. President, at the start of this week, the skies were much darker. I truly believe so. We are starting to see some glimmers of light. We leave New York this week noting that the clouds are lifting, conscious that the sun is peeping out in certain areas, not all, but in certain critical areas, giving us a sense of renewed hope that reset is in fact not only possible, but necessary in key areas: institutional reform, reform in our financial architecture, reform in how we view development, but above all else, reform in how we see each other and value each other. This hope springs from the Pact for the Future and the many declarations that we have made here, the terms in which my fellow leaders spoke from this platform for the most part, the urgent need to recognize reset, 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 even if they didn't call it by that name. It is as if we all truly understand and accept the challenge of rising to solve the major difficulties that are faced by the people of the world, and to recognize that global moral strategic leadership requires of us the commitment to redress the wrongs and to take care of saving people and planet. But recognition of the need for the reset, while it is the first step in any issue, what is now also needed is eternal vigilance as our companion, so that as we take the steps to transform attitudes and institutions and rules, we will not succeed overnight. We will not succeed even in the next decade. But if we don't do the reset to change the legacy of centuries of exploitation and domination, we will not be fit for purpose to meet the needs of our people in the third decade of the 21st century. I can think, therefore, of no better way to conclude than with a song that I had cause to use almost 30 years ago from my own country. Song from Edwin Yearwood. When I first stood on this podium almost 30 years ago in 1995 as a young minister of youth, and I quote, "A voice in my head keeps talking to me. It tells me the road is long. It tells me we must be strong. Roll with the pain and roll with the strife, for today is the rest of the start of your life." Mr. President, may the new hope fostered here this week signal the start of a new deal for people who hitherto were not seen, and even with the existence of this body, whose voice and presence were not felt. These people have been recognized too often, and these countries, as mere statistics, and not with the human dignity that is their birthright, or the human dignity that is the conferred right from these United Nations. Mr. President, I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Minister for National Security and the Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Tshering Tobgay, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I bring to you warm greetings from His Majesty the Druk Gyalpo. Excellencies, 53 years ago, on the 21st of September 1971, a small Himalayan kingdom was admitted to the United Nations. On that day, after centuries of self-imposed isolation, Bhutan became the 128th member of the United Nations. It was a defining moment for us. When a small, poor, landlocked country nestled in the world's highest mountain joined the global community of nations. That same year, the United Nations created the least developed country category to provide targeted support to the world's poorest nations. Bhutan was among the first to be admitted in that list. Back then, our economy was primarily agrarian, operating largely on a barter system. Our per capita GDP income stood at just $215. Life expectancy was barely 40 years. Infant mortality was tragically high at 142 deaths for every 1,000 live births. And our literacy rate was woefully low. We had only, in fact, less than 300 students in the few scattered schools that had been established to provide modern education. Today, I stand before you with a story of transformation and progress. Our per capita GDP has risen to more than $3,500. Life expectancy has increased to 70 years. Infant mortality has plummeted to 15 deaths per 1,000 live births. And our literacy rate, it has climbed to 71%, with youth literacy skyrocketing to 99%. I am pleased to report to this august assembly that because of our all-round progress, last December, 52 years after joining the United Nations, Bhutan graduated from the LDC category. To achieve this achievement did not come easily. It was a journey marked by hard work, perseverance, and sacrifice. But we were not alone. We had the support of many friends who accompanied us on this important journey. I take this opportunity to extend our deep gratitude to the United Nations and its specialized agencies. I would also like to thank all our development partners, including Japan, the European Union, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank for their unwavering support. But most importantly, I would like to reserve our deepest thanks to India, our closest friend and neighbor. They have been with us from the very beginning of our development journey and have remained steadfast in their support and friendship. Excellencies, graduating from the LDC category is a significant milestone. But what truly matters is that we did it in our own terms. Under the leadership of our enlightened monarchs, Bhutan has pursued a development path grounded in the philosophy of gross national happiness. This approach places the happiness and well-being of our people at the center of our development agenda. Thanks to gross national happiness, our economy, while it is still small, is sustainable and inclusive. Healthcare and education are free for all. Our unique culture not only survives, but thrives. More than 72% of our land is under forest cover, and we are recognized as a biodiversity hotspot and a carbon-negative country. Our democracy, a gift from our king, has been embraced by a reluctant population. Excellencies, having graduated from the LDC category, it is now our responsibility to ensure that we sustain our hard-earned progress and that under no circumstances should we ever backslide. As we chart a new course for the future, we are faced with new challenges, particularly those arising from our weak economy. Foremost among them is youth unemployment. To address these challenges, we must strengthen our economy. We must provide our youth with meaningful opportunities to grow and to prosper. We must embrace a new development paradigm. In this context, I am pleased to report that His Majesty the King has announced the establishment of the Gaelifu Mindfulness City. The Gaelifu Mindfulness City is a transformative vision for future urban spaces, a blueprint for living mindfully and sustainably. Spanning 2,600 square kilometers of pristine forests and fertile farmlands, it will enable human innovation and natural ecosystems to thrive together while fostering human well-being, environmental sustainability, and mindful living. We invite thought leaders, innovators, and investors to join us in building this groundbreaking city, contributing to a model of peace, harmony, and progress that others can follow. Excellencies, Bhutan's story is one of hope, but it is also a call to action. More than 50 years have passed, and only 7 nations have graduated from the LDC category, leaving 46 countries still in need. This is unacceptable. The international community must intensify its efforts to ensure that no nation is left behind, that all LDC countries achieve graduation. To accomplish this, we must address poverty, inequality, and vulnerability with a renewed sense of urgency. The Pact for the Future, which we adopted collectively at the Summit of the Future, provides us with a roadmap to transform the lives of the world's most vulnerable. However, transforming the future requires that we also transform institutions shaping it. The United Nations must evolve to meet the realities of today's world. The Security Council as it stands is a relic of the past. We need a council that reflects the current geopolitical, economic landscape, and social realities. Bhutan has long advocated for the reform of the Security Council to make it more representative and effective. For this, India, with its significant economic growth and population and leadership of the Global South, deserves a permanent seat at the Security Council. Similarly, Japan, a leading donor and peace builder, warrants permanent membership. Excellencies, in conclusion, let me reiterate our deep gratitude for the support we have received on Bhutan's journey to LDC graduation. Now we are committed to sustaining this progress, but we will need your continued support. In this regard, we invite your support and investment in initiatives like the Gelifu Mindfulness City. However, as we celebrate Bhutan's progress, we must also intensify our efforts to support other LDCs, ensuring that they too can achieve graduation. In this regard, the role of the United Nations is more critical than ever, reinforcing the imperative for multilateralism in addressing the global challenges we face. As we look to the future, I have the honor to close by repeating a profound message from His Majesty, our beloved King. I first did so 7 years ago, and I repeat, no nation today can stand alone in achievement. Time is slowly telling us that there can be no lasting individual success without success as a community. And there cannot be lasting national progress and success if it does not fit into a future of global peace, harmony, and equality. The world must progress together or fail together. Thank you, and Tashidile.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Xavier Espot Zamora, Head of the Government of the Principality of Andorra. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Senyor President, senyor Secretari General, Excel·lències, senyores i senyors. Voldria iniciar aquesta intervenció felicitant Sa Excel·lència el senyor Philemon Yang per la seva elecció com a president de la 79a Assemblea General de les Nacions Unides. Li agraïm, senyor president, el lema que ha escollit, unitat en la diversitat per a l'avançament de la pau, el desenvolupament sostenible i de la dignitat humana per a tothom i arreu. Un lema amb el qual no podem estar més d'acord i que compartim plenament perquè el nostre país, el Principat d'Andorra, és l'evidència de la capacitat de les persones de perviure al llarg de gairebé 800 anys d'història de manera pacífica gràcies al respecte i a l'entesa en el si d'un territori que mai ha conegut guerres ni ha tingut exèrcits. Fins i tot en les èpoques més convulses del vell continent, Andorra ha estat un oasi de pau, de tolerància i de convivència. També vull adreçar un agraïment molt especial al secretari general, el senyor Antonio Guterres, per la seva perseverança, per anteposar sempre la conciliació i per ser una veu contundent a favor del respecte del dret internacional i de la lluita contra el canvi climàtic. En concret, vull fer una menció especial a l'impuls del secretari general a la Cimera del Futur, de la qual es desprèn el Pacte per al Futur que el meu país ha subscrit amb l'objectiu de reforçar el sistema multilateral i adoptar mesures concretes que ens permetin fer front als nous reptes i forjar un full de ruta per encarar els riscos existencials que amenacen la humanitat i la civilització i les condicions d'habitabilitat del planeta. Els nostres clàssics, que conformen la base de la cultura occidental, afirmen, i ho dic en present perquè els clàssics no moren mai, que tota paraula és vana i buida de contingut, tret que vagi acompanyada de fets. Importen, per damunt de tot, les obres i l'acció de les persones al llarg de la seva vida. Totes les civilitzacions són filles de les circumstàncies concretes que les han envoltat i molt sovint passen a la història per les seves conquestes. Però quina és la conquesta, quina és la vocació i quin és el llegat que deixarà aquesta civilització? O millor dit, quina és la conquesta, la vocació i el llegat que volem que deixi aquesta civilització. Senyores i senyors, avui, des d'Occident, oblidem sovint que la democràcia és quelcom que va molt més enllà de dipositar una papereta cada 4 o 5 anys. Perquè el que sosté el concepte de democràcia són els valors que se'n desprenen, entre els quals hi ha la dignitat, la tolerància, la igualtat, la llibertat i el respecte, tant per a les persones com per a les nacions. Uns valors que aquesta mateixa Assemblea General es va encarregar de blindar fa 76 anys amb la Declaració Universal dels Drets Humans. Però sembla que l'esperit amb el qual es va forjar aquesta mateixa declaració com un símbol de la pau i de la dignitat després de 2 guerres mundials devastadores es va esvaint poc a poc. L'avenç dels posicionaments polítics extrems s'explica com la reacció davant d'un ordre que es percep com amenaçat. El sentiment de pèrdua d'un passat no gaire llunyà i molt millor que el present envaeix les generacions actuals i es reactiva amb la percepció que el canvi climàtic provocarà un empitjorament de les condicions de vida, que la globalització i els moviments migratoris ens dilueixen i despersonalitzen com a societat o que els infants, els adolescents i els joves d'avui viuran pitjor que els seus pares. Ens trobem, per tant, en un punt d'inflexió en què cal encarar realment aquest debat i aportar respostes concretes i efectives per contrarrestar, per evitar tot plegat. A les portes del 80è aniversari, les Nacions Unides han de continuar sent l'organització en majúscules d'aquest món, des d'on tots els estats que la integrem i li donem sentit remem en la mateixa direcció, que no és altra que donar una resposta efectiva als grans reptes del nostre temps per deixar un llegat esperançador a les generacions futures. Senyores i senyors, mai no havíem disposat de tantes eines per assolir la cooperació i el diàleg. Per tant, davant d'un escenari complex, des de la igualtat de les nacions hem de fer prevaldre la Carta de les Nacions Unides i enfortir els seus pilars a través de la defensa dels drets humans i el dret internacional humanitari com a conjunt normatiu de relació entre els estats. La gravetat dels conflictes a Ucraïna, a Gaza, al Líban, al Sudan o d'altres que malauradament ja són permanents, com a la regió del Sahel, no ens poden deixar indiferents i cal fer una crida urgent per arribar a un dels objectius més nobles de la política, la pau. Hem d'unir-nos i saber trobar solucions als conflictes fora de la violència i els recursos militars. Per aquest motiu, fem una crida a les parts per treballar amb horitzons de pau, per tenir respecte i per acatar, com deia, les normes del dret internacional humanitari, perquè res no justifica els atacs que està patint la població civil, perquè res no justifica els atacs contra hospitals i escoles i perquè res no justifica que utilitzem la fam com una estratègia de guerra. Res no justifica tanta irracionalitat, una irracionalitat de la qual els nens i les nenes són les principals víctimes. En l'agenda internacional andorrana, la infància i l'adolescència ocupen un lloc molt destacat, perquè creiem fermament que són el present i el futur i, per tant, tota acció al seu favor esdevé estratègica per al desenvolupament de qualsevol país. Per aquest motiu, des d'un inici hem estat donant tot el nostre suport a l'oficina de la representant especial del secretari general per als infants i els conflictes armats i més recentment a l'estudi sobre l'impacte del canvi climàtic en els infants i els conflictes armats. I quan els preguntava a l'inici de la meva intervenció quina és la conquesta, quina és la vocació, el llegat que volem deixar, no hi ha d'haver dubte. Assegurar un món en pau per als infants i per als adolescents i aconseguir que les generacions futures no visquin pitjor, sinó que participin plenament del progrés, tal com ha quedat palès aquests dies a la Cimera d'Octubre. Excel·lències, l'any 1993 el nostre país va entrar a formar part de les Nacions Unides. Ens trobàvem en un context internacional força esperançador, amb una Europa reunificada després de la Guerra Freda. I quan vam fer el pas d'entrar a formar part d'aquesta organització, ho vam fer amb el convenciment que som una societat oberta al món que comparteix amb la comunitat internacional els reptes i les oportunitats globals. Perquè els problemes del món també són els nostres problemes i per això volíem i volem ser partícips de les solucions a aquests problemes. Han passat més de 3 dècades i malgrat que hagin tornat els fantasmes de la Guerra Freda, malgrat que el conflicte a l'Orient Mitjà hagi assolit una tensió sense precedents, malgrat que l'avenç dels extremismes sigui preocupant, el nostre país creu fermament en el concert de les nacions, en el compromís internacional i en el multilateralisme com els millors instruments, els únics instruments per resoldre tot plegat. Però Andorra també acorda una importància particular a la cooperació regional. I en aquest cas, amb la Unió Europea, qui ha negociat un acord d'associació que ens ha de permetre accedir de manera progressiva, de manera estructurada, al mercat interior europeu i facilitar la diversificació de la nostra economia, així com participar en la construcció d'una realitat geogràfica, econòmica i política, en aquest cas la de la Unió Europea, des de l'estatus privilegiat d'estat associat. Quan Andorra assumeix una obligació, sigui esdevenint membre d'un organisme internacional o comprometent-se mitjançant un tractat internacional, és molt conscient de les seves implicacions. I la nostra dimensió, per molt petita que pugui semblar, als ulls dels grans estats, no ens allunya d'objectius ambiciosos i cada dia més crucials com el multilateralisme, l'emergència climàtica, la igualtat de gènere, la transformació digital o la diversitat cultural. En aquest darrer àmbit, Andorra està orgullosa d'haver cofacilitat un any més la resolució sobre el multilingüisme a les Nacions Unides juntament amb Guatemala. Senyores i senyors, és cert que el canvi climàtic és una amenaça global, però també és ben cert que hi ha territoris que en resulten més afectats que d'altres. Ho són aquelles regions on el nivell del mar augmenta i també els territoris de muntanya amb un ecosistema més vulnerable. I aquest és el nostre cas, el cas d'Andorra. El canvi climàtic pot arribar a modificar els nostres hàbits vitals i també l'economia del nostre país. Per aquest motiu, hem fet de la lluita contra el canvi climàtic una de les nostres més grans fites, tant a escala internacional com a escala nacional. Des de la ratificació el 2011 del Conveni Marc de les Nacions Unides sobre el canvi climàtic, Andorra ha complert les seves obligacions de comunicació sota els principis de transparència, coherència, comparabilitat, exhaustivitat i precisió, i ho ha fet anticipant-se a més a les exigències del conveni. El 2015, Andorra va ser una de les parts pioneres del Conveni Marc a comunicar la seva contribució a escala nacional i a actualitzar-la el 2020 i el 2022 amb la finalitat d'incrementar els objectius a mitjà termini i assolir la neutralitat climàtica al 2050. El 2023 va ser el primer país del món en presentar l'informe bianual de transparència, demostrant així una vegada més la importància del compromís que mantenim amb la lluita contra el canvi climàtic. En l'àmbit nacional també hem fet grans esforços per implementar una nova política energètica amb l'objectiu d'augmentar progressivament la producció nacional d'energia renovable i substituir les fonts